Everyone ignored the CEO's paralyzed daughter until the single dad asked, "Can I be your date?" But before you dive into this story that will make your heart race and your soul tremble, let me ask you something. What if one moment, one question, one stranger's courage could change a life forever? That's exactly what happened here, and trust me, you do not want to miss what unfolds next. So hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because stories like these aren't just stories. They're journeys, and you're about to walk through one that will keep you hooked until the very end. It all began at a glittering corporate gala in New York, the kind of event where everyone wore their best clothes, flashed their best smiles, and pretended their lives were perfect. But among the sea of diamonds and tuxedos sat a young woman in a wheelchair, her posture elegant, yet her eyes quietly broken. Because while she was the daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, she was also the one no one dared to approach, the one people whispered about, the one they ignored, as if her paralysis made her invisible. Her name was Ilara, and if you looked closely, you would see the way she tried to smile when others passed by, only to have her greetings brushed off with polite nods. You would see the way her perfectly styled hair framed a face hiding years of disappointment. Because every time there was an event, every time there was a dance, she remained on the sidelines. Like a priceless painting everyone admired from afar, but no one truly touched. Tonight was supposed to be special, though, because her father, Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, was announcing a billion-dollar merger. And the room was filled with investors, journalists and heirs of dynasties, but even with champagne flowing and cameras flashing, the shadow of loneliness clung to Ilara. And the cruel irony was that in a room of hundreds she might as well have been alone. Mini suspense rises here. Because across the hall stood someone entirely out of place, a man without a tuxedo, wearing only a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, holding a glass of water instead of champagne, watching everything with sharp yet kind eyes. A man named Daniel, a single dad who had stumbled into this world of polished masks for reasons no one here could have guessed. Daniel wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't an investor. He wasn't even supposed to be here. But fate has strange ways of pulling threads together, and tonight his thread was about to collide with Ilara's in a way that would shake the walls of power and shatter every illusion in the room. Because as the orchestra struck up a waltz, and everyone paired off to dance, Ilara sat there, pretending not to notice the pitying looks and the whispers, when Daniel suddenly crossed the floor, his steps sure, his eyes locked on hers, and the crowd actually gasped when he bent down, smiled warmly, and asked softly, "Can I be your date?" A question that sounded simple, but would set off a storm so fierce that by the end of this night, secrets would be exposed, loyalties tested, and destinies rewritten. But pause here, because why would a man like him ask that? What drove him to risk ridicule, and what dark secrets connected him to the Sterling Empire? Keep listening, because every 2 minutes you'll feel the ground shift beneath you, and right now, the floor is about to crack open beneath Ilara's carefully guarded world. Ilara's breath caught in her throat when Daniel asked that question, because no one in years had dared to treat her like she mattered, and for a moment, silence fell over the entire ballroom like time itself was holding its breath. Her father Richard stiffened at the podium. Investors exchanged amused smirks, and socialites whispered behind jeweled hands, because to them, Daniel looked like an intruder, a man who clearly didn't belong. And yet there he was offering Ilara not pity but choice. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw something startling, not condescension, not discomfort, but genuine kindness, a warmth that pierced through the cold walls she had built around her heart. So she nodded slowly, her lips trembling into the faintest smile, and whispered yes, and the shock that rippled through the crowd was almost physical, as if no one could comprehend what had just happened. The orchestra faltered, then resumed its tune, and Daniel gently wheeled her onto the dance floor, and while others laughed quietly at the absurdity of a man trying to dance with a paralyzed woman, Daniel leaned close and said softly, "They only laugh because they've never felt what it means to be free." And Ilara, for the first time in years, laughed too, a sound so delicate and unexpected it drew stares not of pity, but of awe. Mini suspense rises here because high above in the mezzanine, a woman in a crimson dress was watching them, her eyes narrow, calculating. Her name was Victoria Crane, ruthless rival to Richard Sterling, and she knew in that moment that something dangerous was unraveling. Because Daniel wasn't just some ordinary guest, he had ties to secrets Richard would rather bury, and the mere fact he was here tonight meant war. Victoria slipped away, making a call that would set into motion a series of moves designed to crush the Sterlings forever. While on the dance floor, Ilara's heart pounded with exhilaration and fear as Daniel guided her in small, graceful circles, making her feel like she was gliding, and every eye in the room that once ignored her now could not look away. But mini suspense struck again when Richard himself descended from the stage. His jaw clenched, his voice low but sharp as he addressed Daniel. "Who exactly are you, and what gives you the right to waltz into my event and humiliate my family?" Daniel met his glare calmly. "I'm just a father trying to teach my little girl what courage looks like." Richard blinked, thrown off for a moment, because those words hit deeper than expected. Ilara whispered, "Father, please." But Richard only tightened his grip on her chair, as if reclaiming ownership, and the tension grew unbearable. Yet Daniel did not back away. Instead, he placed a card on the table beside them, a card that bore not a company logo, but a faded military insignia, one Richard recognized instantly. His face paled because buried in his past was a deal made long ago, with soldiers who saved his empire in exchange for promises never kept, and Daniel was the son of one of those men. Suddenly, the glittering gala seemed less like a celebration and more like a battlefield. Ilara sensed the shift the way her father's. Hands trembled slightly the way Daniel's jaw tightened, and she realized she was caught between a father who saw her as fragile and a stranger who saw her as whole. But before anything more could be said, the ballroom doors burst open. Men in dark suits stormed in, not security but operatives under Victoria's payroll. The crowd panicked. Champagne glasses shattered, heels clicked frantically against marble floors, and in the chaos Richard tried to shield his daughter, but Daniel moved faster, pushing Ilara's chair behind a column before confronting the intruders. Mini suspense sharpens here because as one of the men lunged, Daniel countered with the precision of someone trained, his borrowed suit jacket ripping slightly to reveal the tattoo of the same military unit that had once saved Richard's fortune. Ilara gasped, realizing this man carried ghosts her father had long buried. Daniel fought with brutal efficiency, but in the confusion, one of the intruders managed to slip away with a stolen folder from Richard's briefcase, a folder containing documents that could expose every illegal deal Sterling Innovations had ever made. Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling Ilara back to safety as Richard shouted for his guards. But deep inside, Richard knew this wasn't just an attack. This was a message. Victoria had declared war, and Daniel's arrival tonight was no coincidence. Ilara's eyes burned with questions. "Who are you really?" she demanded, and Daniel looked at her with a haunted expression. "I'm a man who lost everything because of your father, and I swore I'd never step foot in his world again. But then I saw you sitting alone and I couldn't walk away." Mini suspense deepens as Ilara's heart twisted, torn between the truth unraveling before her and the kindness Daniel had shown. She remembered how everyone else ignored her, how every smile at these galas was fake. Yet here stood a man willing to risk everything for her without even knowing her, and she realized this night wasn't just about a merger, it was about choices, about whether she would keep living in the shadows of her father's empire or step into the unknown with a man everyone dismissed as nothing. Richard shouted for the gala to continue, desperate to save face, but the illusion had already shattered. Whispers filled the air. Rumors spread like wildfire, and even the media cameras captured Daniel standing beside Ilara like a protector, not a stranger. Ilara turned to her father, her voice trembling but strong. For once, I'm not invisible and you can't hide me anymore. Daniel looked at her with quiet pride, but the storm was far from over, because Victoria Crane, now armed with Richard's secrets, would stop at nothing to destroy the Sterlings, and Ilara was now caught in the center of a battle that threatened to consume them all. The night ended, not in celebration, but in dread, as the city lights outside flickered against the glass, and Daniel promised Ilara quietly, "No matter what comes, I won't let them hurt you," though deep inside he feared the cost of keeping that promise, because enemies were closing in faster than either of them realized. And when dawn came, it would bring betrayals none of them could imagine. The night after the gala changed everything for Ilara, because for the first time in her life, people actually whispered her name, not as a pitying afterthought, but as part of a scandal. The media spun headlines about the mysterious man who danced, with the Sterling heiress tabloids speculated about secret romances, and investors questioned Richard's control of his own empire. Yet while the world outside feasted on rumors inside the Sterling mansion, tension boiled. Richard confined Ilara to her room, furious at both her defiance and Daniel's audacity. But Ilara's mind refused to be caged. She replayed the dance over and over, the warmth of Daniel's hand, the way he had shielded her when chaos erupted, and she realized she had never felt safer than in that moment. Mini suspense struck, because at that very hour, Daniel was miles away, pacing inside his modest apartment, his daughter Lily, asleep on the couch, clutching a worn teddy bear. He watched her chest rise and fall, and whispered, "I promised your mother I'd protect you, but now I've dragged us into a war." He picked up the stolen card Richard had thrown at him, an old photograph of their fathers standing shoulder to shoulder after saving Sterling's fortune. In a jungle far away, Daniel's father had died poor, betrayed by broken promises, while Richard grew into an untouchable CEO. And that truth burned like fire in Daniel's chest. Yet the memory of Ilara's smile cut through his rage. She didn't deserve to pay for her father's sins, and that conflict tore at him relentlessly. Mini suspense thickens when the very next morning Richard received a call that froze the blood in his veins. Victoria Crane had gone public, leaking fragments of the stolen documents and accusing Sterling Innovations of laundering money through overseas shell companies. The stock plummeted within hours. Reporters swarmed the mansion, and Richard realized his empire was on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, Ilara demanded answers. Why did Victoria target us? Why did Daniel risk his life for me? Richard avoided her eyes, but she pressed harder until he confessed the truth. Decades ago, he had used Daniel's father and his men as expendable assets, promising them shares in Sterling Innovations if they survived. But when they returned scarred and broken, he erased their names from the records, kept the empire for himself, and Daniel was left fatherless and penniless. Mini suspense ignites as Ilara recoiled in horror, because for years she thought her father was a titan of integrity, but now she saw the cracks, the lies, and the reason. Daniel's eyes carried both kindness and pain. Ilara whispered, "You stole his life, you stole his future." Richard snapped, "Everything I did was for this family." But Ilara fired back, "What family you've only ever cared about? Your empire." Silence stretched heavy until suddenly gunfire shattered the air. Operatives loyal to Victoria stormed the mansion, their target not Richard but Ilara, because Victoria knew the fastest way to crush a man was to destroy what he loved most. Daniel burst through the chaos, arriving just in time, his fists and fury breaking through the attackers like a storm. He scooped Ilara into his arms despite her protests and carried her through a back passage, shouting, "I won't let them take you." Ilara clung to him, torn between fear and exhilaration, mini suspense pulses as they escaped into the city, hunted by men in black SUVs weaving through streets, until Daniel found refuge in an abandoned warehouse. Lily waiting there, already terrified. Daniel held his daughter close and introduced her to Ilara. "This is Lily, my world." Ilara smiled softly, despite the danger, and Lily whispered, "Shyly, are you my dad's princess?" Daniel flushed, but Ilara's eyes shimmered with tears, because for the first time someone saw her as something more than a burden. Mini-suspense spikes as footsteps echoed outside the warehouse. Victoria herself entered, flanked by guards, her crimson dress like spilled blood against the shadows. She smirked. "So this is the infamous daughter and the soldier's son. What a pathetic pair," she raised. "The stolen folder taunting Richard's empire is already ashes. All I need is you, Ilara, to sign away your inheritance and everything collapses." Daniel stepped forward, shielding her, his voice low. "You'll have to go through me." Victoria sneered gladly, but before the fight could ignite, Ilara surprised them all by wheeling herself forward, her voice steady. "You think I'm weak, invisible, a pawn in my father's game, but I am more than his daughter, and tonight I choose for myself." She reached for the folder and tore it in half, shocking everyone. Mini-suspense flares as Victoria screamed in rage, lunging forward. But Daniel intercepted a brutal clash, erupting fists, gunfire, shouts, until finally Daniel pinned Victoria to the ground, his knuckles bleeding his chest, heaving. Richard and his security stormed in, too late to save face, but just in time to see his daughter holding her head high, for once refusing to be hidden anymore. Richard's empire would never recover fully. His sins were too deep, but Ilara had already chosen a different path, one that didn't depend on his shadow. Mini-suspense softens into resolution as weeks later, headlines told a different story. Not about Sterling innovations, but about Ilara Sterling, who broke free from the golden cage and launched a foundation to support veterans and children with disabilities at her side. Daniel not as her bodyguard, not as her rescuer, but as her partner, and Lily, who adored Ilara as if she were already family. Richard watched from afar, broken yet strangely proud, because his daughter had become everything he never allowed her to be: strong, fearless, loved. And when at another gala cameras flashed and guests whispered, Ilara no longer sat ignored in the corner. She rolled onto the dance floor, holding Daniel's hand. And when he whispered, "Can I be your date again?" she laughed through tears and said, "Forever." And in that moment, the world finally saw what they had ignored all along, that true worth is not in power or perfection, but in the courage to see and be seen. Mini-suspense fades into hope as the music swelled, the lights glittered, and the story that began with one question ended with an answer that echoed louder than wealth, louder than secrets, louder than fear. Love had won, and it would never be ignored again.